I would like to welcome all of you to give your comments or any questions or whatsoever to Mr. Mustafa. Welcome. Yes, Doctor. Yep.
I guess the AKP and Erdogan were able to achieve things like unbanning the hijab and all that because they had a mandate from the people in terms of their large win in the elections. In Malaysia, the opposition actually won more votes than the ruling party. But if you look at the distribution of seats, the distribution of seats is very much more in favor of the ruling party because of gerrymandering and other things and complicity of the electoral commission with the ruling party. I guess what AKP and Erdogan did in Turkey wouldn't have been possible if they didn't have an electoral commission which was free and fair. One of the problems I think which we face in Malaysia is that I think the electoral commission has to be changed, has to be disentangled, has to be disassociated from the ruling party and to be truly independent, which it is not. Could you tell something about the electoral process?
Meaning the commission which
runs the election.
Good point. In Turkey, elections are monitored by a board of judges. It's not the government commission, it's a judiciary board. It's actually called Higher Yüksek Seçim Kurulu, Higher Education Election Board. And no party official counts the votes. It's counted by the judiciary well, at the higher level. At the local level, you know what happens? If you go and vote in Turkey in a Istanbul neighborhood, typically it will be in a school. There will be a ballot. You will go and vote, and there is a representative of every party sitting next to the ballot.
We have that.
Yeah. At the end of the day, they will all together open the ballots, count it, and agree, all different parties. Okay, this is the number. So they send it to the center. In the center, this system is controlled by a certain board of judges whose job is to run the whole election system. In this sense, elections are free and fair. There has never been a rigged election since 1946. In 1946, we had the fake election, famous fake election. The Kemalist Party, the CHP, was in power, the single party. The Democrat Party was only newly founded in 1946. It was the first election Democrat Party entered, the opposition. And it was a funny election. Votes were given, it was based on principle of open vote and secret counting. Not secret vote and open counting. In other words, the gendarme could see who you're voting for, and when they counted in the secret by the government. And of course, the government official just wrote what they wanted. So after that scandal, and everybody this turned into scandal, the electoral process was given to the judiciary, and since that, it is controlled by the judiciary. It's important that it is by the judiciary because if you give it to a party, the party will try to advance its interest as much as it can. Therefore, I think the neutrality of the electoral commission is very, very important. And in Turkey, that's been done by giving it to the judicial under judicial control. Even then, how partisan is the judiciary can be a problem, of course, but at least better than giving it to the control of the ruling government. I mean, you should never allow the government to control a neutral body because that won't be a neutral body anymore. There should be some neutral body that are separate from the government.
In theory, that's the situation here, but in practice, it's quite different. Even the, I don't know whether there are any special branch guys around here, but even the police, even the anti-corruption agency, in theory they are independent, but in practice they are not. That's why people outside of Malaysia think that we have such a great system here, such an egalitarian system. I went to the US and I met a scholar, and he was saying, "Oh, what a good system you have in Malaysia," and all that. And I had to disabuse him of all his erroneous belief, because people don't realize outside. I don't know whether you yourself knew about the shenanigans going on in this country.
About the shenanigans?
All these nonsense, shenanigans.
Shenanigans?
Shenanigans about the foreplay.
Okay. Well, I don't want to comment on Malaysia until I get to the airport, you know. And I have respect for Malaysia's system. But of course, here's what I can say. Governments can get away with their wrong ways, whatever that is, as long as there's real little reaction to that and consciousness about that in society. And of course, that reaction and consciousness will come through media, and there should be an independent media, and also like concerned citizens. I mean, if everybody starts to joke about what the head of government says about this or that, ultimately this can't go that far. And that consciousness doesn't come up one morning, but I mean, you breed it over time. And the idea that, the government should be responsible to the people, the government exists for us, we don't exist for the government, and the idea that government should be transparent, so that because it can make big mistakes and maybe it can even commit crimes or nepotism and corruption, so it should be monitored by civil society, by NGOs, this and that. This evolves over time, and in the West too, it evolved over time. It didn't happen one day. I mean, like when I was like watching an American film, like when I was a kid, two American politicians were corrupt, and they were so fearful that the New York Times would learn this story. I mean, I couldn't understand. I mean, couldn't they tell the New York Times not to run this story? Well, in America too, I'm sure the government puts pressure media on as much as possible, but not that much. And if the media wouldn't ultimately fear if they see a corruption story to publish it. That's why it's very important to have independent media which will not shy away from criticizing the government, and the government will be concerned that if society learns this through these channels, it will be a problem, and it will be more. Because, I mean, government is made of people too. It's not anything holy or sacred. And there are people like us. Among them, there are good people, bad people. And the more you have power, the more you're tempted to use that power, at least for nepotism, for your own relatives and for your people, instead of. And that's why transparency, independent media, so on and so forth, are very important. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's just you have to build these institutions. In Turkey, for example, we didn't have any private TVs until 1991 or 92, early 90s. There was only state television. And when you opened state television, the news were, our respected president said this, our respected prime minister said this, our respected minister of interior said that, and like you were getting the state official narrative, which was okay. But then I would like to have a private TV which will joke about that statement, or which will, say, well, he's saying this, but facts are different. In that sense, and these institutions like the government plus independent media, civil society, NGOs, is very important to create diversity in society, because our faiths are sacred, but no person is sacred. No institution is sacred. They're just all doing their things, and the more you exchange views between them, the more you have a chance to find what is the truth out there.
I think, I don't know how well versed you are with the Malaysian scenario, but the thing is, all the print media are controlled by the government. I think Prof. Azmi spoke the other day about the Printing Press and Publications Act. Recently we had a print media newspaper which was arbitrarily banned, ostensibly because they mentioned something about the Prime Minister's wife. I mean, that's the take, because the government doesn't say why it's banned. They just say it's banned. And we obviously can't go very far if everything is controlled by the state. not only the print media, but even the NGOs are controlled. They sing to the tune of the government. Of course, they have their vested interests to be friendly to the government. And all the other people who are liberal, who think independently, they don't have a hope in hell of getting their message across, because all the media, all the print media is tightly controlled by the government. This is like Big Brother in 1984, is it, in Malaysia. And Alhamdulillah, today we have the alternative media.
Social media.
The internet. Otherwise, Dr. Farooq's whatever he spoke will never have come to the ears of people like me. I wouldn't have known. So this is something which is very different here from Turkey, and this is something which people outside Malaysia are not aware of. They all think it's a model Islamic state. You come here, when the time comes to pray, the adhan is there. You don't have religious police knocking you on the head and telling you to go to the mosque to pray. People go and pray or fast. Of course, we have people catching those who don't fast, but nobody knocks you on the head and tells you to go and pray. That's the general impression people have of Malaysia, that everything is hunky-dory, but which is not. And I wonder how Turkey, which was firmly in the grasp of the Kemalists, how did Turkey manage to slip from the grasp of the Kemalists and come to this state now where there is at least some freedom, although in the last few weeks things have gone a bit backward. How did they break free of the grasp?
Well, it could break free because Kemalism was a minority ideology, although it had the powerful institutions. Plus, the opponents of Kemalism, like the religious conservatives and liberals, built their media, built their institutions, build their finances. Like now in Turkey, when you look at like some of the big newspapers like Zaman, Sabah, Taraf, which is a different story in itself, they have been very critical voices against Kemalism. And why? Because they created their own social sphere with industrialists, businessmen, their own institutions and NGOs and so on and so forth. So they have gradually became a powerful force, and they already got the ballots anyway. So they had the ballots, plus they had created their media and so on and so forth. Now the question is it becoming too powerful now, and the other side being crushed? So you always need some balance in that.
Could you relate a little bit about the role of the military, especially? I mean, the AKP, how did it rise to power without the military intervention? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the military proved to be a paper tiger, in the words of a politician who actually sympathized with the military but said this critically a few years ago. What happened was that, there was a fear, like the military would do something. One day they would come back and launch another coup. Gradually, it turned out that they're not doing anything. Why they're not doing anything? Well, the last time the military launched a proper coup in 1980, there was one state TV, and they put a tank in front of it and put their video and put military marches, and that was it. Now there are 200 news channels and maybe 25 news channels, dozens of newspapers, internet, social media, everything. They cannot. If you launch a coup, what do you do next day? Plus, if they launched the coup, the economy would collapse. They couldn't take the risk. Turkey was a much closed economy in the 70s. When you integrate with the world, it becomes much harder to impose something directly, which will make the investors in Turkey scare and run away. And plus, there have been certain court cases against the military. Erdogan relied on the police against the military. That's the other thing. There was military, but then there was the police. The police wiretapped generals, followed them, put some of them on trial, maybe too many people on trial. A little bit witch hunt was the case there. In the past, in between 2007 and 11. So the generals who would want to have a coup found themselves one day being questioned by the police. And it was a shock for Turks to see a top general being handcuffed and taken by the police to a station and being asked about the coup plans he had. Again, I think some of those cases were a little excessive. There was a sense of witch hunting and paranoia maybe. So it's not a full clean picture there. But, I mean, like factually speaking, yes, Erdogan's side had the police, which has to be a neutral institution, like the military itself. But institutions were divided between, and the MIT, the National Security Intelligence, was also on Erdogan's side, and it also was watching these things. So, I mean, if one institution is partisan, then you have another institution which is on your side. That was a strategy on your tactic. But it's not been a very clean process. The Kemalists had some very authoritarian methods and raw and paranoid mindset. The people who defeated the Kemalists have actually shown that they're sometimes not that different. Because ultimately it's the same political culture and same mistakes can be found in different actors of the same game.
One way that Malaysia is different from Turkey is that we have three races here, or three ethnic groups. The Malays constitute by far the large majority. But the government in power keeps its power partly by imposing the bogeyman that, if you don't, all of one particular race, all of you don't get together and fight the other guys, you're going to be overrun by them. Which I think is a great advantage that Turkey didn't have, because most of the people were one. They were almost close to a monolithic group, even though in the past you had Armenians and Greeks and all that. But people largely had become, Turkified, if you discount the Kurds. So this is one problem that we have. The other question I want to ask you is, initially I suppose, as happened in Afghanistan when the Russians were there, all the different Mujahideen groups got together to fight the common enemy. And once the Russians left, they fell to fighting among themselves until the Taliban, knocked off all the others and they became the sole powerful group there. Similarly, I can't help thinking that that's what's happening in Turkey now. The Gulen movement and AKP were together fighting the generals, and now the generals are all neutered. So I think they are beginning to start, rattling the sabers at each other. Is that so?
Good example, yes. It's a bit similar to that. It's not a violent war, I mean, luckily. But yeah, politically, they defeated the common enemy, but they could not get along with each other, and they now turn against each other. It's true. It can be framed that way. As for the other issue of scare tactics, well, if you want to scare people, there's always somebody that you can use as a scapegoat. It's true that in Malaysia, for example, yeah, we are not divided religiously. I mean, here you have the ethnic and religious divisions in society. In Turkey, you can always make people afraid of the Kurds, Kurdish separatists, deep state, or foreign imperialists. Now Erdogan uses the Gulen movement as a scapegoat. They have infiltrated everywhere and they are everywhere. I mean, like when a politician starts to speak, or a statesman starts to speak about dangers and threats all the time, that's a sign to say something is going on here. Because that's the best way to get rid of criticism and create this idea of solidarity under the leader because you're under attack. You can be under attack. Of course, countries can be occupied and bombed. Of course, then you need really solidarity. But if someone tells me there are horrible enemies out there, they're everywhere, they're behind you, so you should follow me, I'll say, like, what's your deal? Man. I mean, that's so universal and so common. They don't even plan this, maybe. It's just intuitional. They just say enemies are out there. And of course, when it could be Jews, Freemasons, whatever, all the typical scapegoats that we have in our societies. the fact is, there can be problems out there. There can be bad people or bad organizations, or the West can have some imperialist plans on our societies. But we're not going to change anything by constantly fearing them. We will change something by changing ourselves, by strengthening our economies, democracies, our social structure. So the practical effect of the fear tactic is to avoid criticism and to create one voice, right? Let's be all one voice. It's not a good thing to be all one voice. You should have different voices that will cancel out each other, they will compete with each other, criticize each other. And this is such a common tactic, and unfortunately, yes, in Turkey too, we are hearing it a lot these days on the government side. Interestingly, the Kemalists were using the same scare tactic against Erdogan. In 2007, a best-selling Kemalist book argued that Erdogan is a secret Jew working with the elders of Zion to destroy Atatürk's secular republic. Why? Because Jews decided to turn Turkey into an Islamic state. Why would they want to do that? They seriously believed in this. Now, Erdogan is speaking about some Zionist conspiracies these days too. I take it as serious as I took the other one, seriously.
I heard someone say that Kemal himself was a secret Jew.
Everybody's a secret Jew in our part of the world. Anybody who you don't like is a secret Jew. Sorry?
Going to be synonym with Jews.
Yeah.
Can I raise a question on?
Yeah. Dr. Farooq, how should we?
Yeah.
He's the president.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I'm curious, when the AKP party came about, right? It needed to appeal to also groups which don't belong to them. How were they able to universalize their values?
Good point, yes. They're losing that a little bit these days, but yes, that's one of their success stories. Here we should underline Abdullah Gül. It is actually the party of Gül and Erdogan together. And Abdullah Gül was always the more polite, reconciliatory, encompassing figure, compared to Erdogan, the fighter, the hero, that sort of thing. And today, still, I think Abdullah Gül embodies the values that are originally in the founding of the AKP. Although AKP itself got away from those a little bit and became a more combative political party. Yes, indeed, AKP's narrative was, in the first term and the second term, was generally, Turkey has an oppressive state. This oppressive state violated the rights of not just conservative Muslims, but also Kurds, Armenians, non-Muslims, liberals. We are hugging all of them, and we are protecting the rights of all of them against this very oppressive, military-dominated, ideological, core, which was a good, message. Especially Kurds are very important here. They make maybe 15% of Turkish society. AKP has been the most Kurdish-friendly major political Turkish party, besides the pro-Kurdish parties that are exclusively Kurdish anyway. And they have made many reforms which lifted the bans on Kurdish language and culture. That's why AKP gets a lot of Kurdish votes still today. They initiated the peace process with the Kurdish separatists, the PKK, and they had won the liberals as well. Because who are the liberals in Turkey? In Turkey, the liberals are basically the people who want a European Union type democracy, like individual freedom, rights for everybody. The liberals defended the hijab strongly from the secularist oppression. Because in Turkey, a secularist and a liberal are very different things. And then the Islamists. And liberals and Islamists were generally on the same side against the Kemalist establishment. Because liberals said it's an individual choice to wear hijab. I can wear a miniskirt, but that lady has the right to wear the hijab, and the government has no right to say that she cannot. So they defended the headscarf very passionately. So AKP was the party that liberals voted for. Armenians, which is not a big community, but many Armenians voted for AKP because AKP opened the Armenian churches that were closed down by the Kemalist secular Republican system. Why? Because of nationalism. I mean, Kemalizm was a very nationalist ideology. Armenians and Greeks were the other because of the nationalist problems. And also Greeks had suffered during the Turkish-Greek tensions in Cyprus and so on and so forth. So AKP's narrative was that we protect the non-Muslims as well. And they referred to the Ottoman pluralism, millet system, Christians having their right and share in society, and so on and so forth. So these are all the good things I think the AKP has been able to accomplish. The only problem is that AKP is not keeping the rhetoric that principled anymore. And it is being consolidated to its earlier era, Erbakan era rhetoric, more nepotistic, only consolidating its conservative base and losing the other camps that it has been able to get support from.
I'm asking this question because of the Islamic Brotherhood, Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. It had a lot of positive views. People had a lot of support for it. But within 1 year of rule, it almost totally evaporated. They seem to have left behind everyone except their own supporters. How did the AKP actually, what principles did they use, and how did this, I mean, the support for other groups did not actually hinder or have a backlash among the conservative groups among themselves?
Well, good example. I mean, the Egyptian liberals are also crazy too, so I have little sympathy. They're not real liberals, and I think it's a fake term in Egypt. The better example is Tunisia, of course. In Tunisia, a Nahda party, is a bit similar to the AKP in its earlier years, has been able to establish some dialogue, consensus. Actually, today I have an article in the International New York Times saying that Turkey should take Tunisia as a model, not vice versa, as was argued before. In the sense that they have been able to, by consensus, able to draft a very good liberal constitution, Islamists and liberals and conservatives and secularists, all of them together. Yes, I mean, the thing is, first of all, general rule of politics. If you only focus on consolidating your base, you will turn off other parts of society. That's universal. Plus, when it is about Islam and politics, there's always a fear in the more secular parts of society in the Middle East that the Islamists will come and they will use state power to impose what they think as real Islam. And is this a paranoia? Well, there are many examples of this, let's be honest. I mean, there's Taliban, of course, no AKP will be like Taliban. I mean, that's an exaggeration. But there are many examples of Islam being imposed through state power. And I think there's bad examples for Islam, bad examples for democracy, liberty, all of itself. So that's why Islamists should be double careful not to give the image that they will use political power only to advance their ideological agenda. Of course, they had the right to make certain political decisions and appoint their people to government bureaucracies, but including people from the other branches, being more reconciliatory, giving certain guarantees, is important. And for that, they should think theoretically about Islam and freedom. I think Rashid Ghannouchi does that. Rashid Ghannouchi emphasizes in Tunisia that Islam cannot be imposed. We are good Muslims, but we will never impose this on our people. We can only share. That's an important, because he thought out these issues. I mean, his books and theories and so on and so forth. Does Ikhwan has a Rashid Ghannouchi in Egypt? No. In Turkey, do we have? Well, we thought, but it's very, still complicated picture. So, I think, yes, especially, and also we should not legitimize every bias of the secularists here. I mean, some of them are just class bias against the uneducated people and so on and so forth. That cannot be legitimized either. But the only way out from this dichotomy is to build consensus. And I think so far Tunisia has been able to do this. And I'm watching that example very carefully.
Oh, very good. Do we have any other questions? Yes. Yeah. So.
I just want to get your views on Turkey's position in NATO.
NATO.
Yeah. Turkey is the only Muslim country with NATO, right? In order to be part of NATO, they have to be Europeans. So, is it true that in order, is it true, that statement? In order to be part of NATO, Turkey has to be liberal, number one, and to be how do I put it? Democratic, Western. Cannot be a secular country. Cannot be a conservative country. You know. And Turkey wants to be part of NATO.
It is a part of NATO, yeah.
It has to. It wants to be there.
Wants to be there.
Accepted by, by
Preserved.
NATO.
Indeed. Like, let's go back to NATO history. Turkey joined NATO, as I said, in 1952, very willingly. Why? Because it was a world divided by NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Turkey was very concerned, very fearful about a possible Soviet invasion during the Cold War. So during the Cold War, Turkey happily joined NATO, and Turkey's conservative Muslims, they all supported joining NATO because their fear was godless communism. So the only people who opposed NATO during the Cold War were Turkey's communists. They protested against, Americans burning flags in Vietnam, so on and so forth. After the Cold War, though, of course, that Soviet threat is gone. Still in the 90s, NATO had sympathy in Turkey because NATO acted belatedly, though, on behalf of the Balkan Muslims against Serbian aggression in Bosnia-Herzegovina and then in Kosovo. That was also a positive thing for Turks because Turkey deeply cares about Balkan Muslims. We have historical connections. My wife is from Bosnia, and you can see the connection there. After the Afghan war, though, after 9/11, NATO has been perceived as a anti-Islamic force by some people. At least, the war in Afghanistan by NATO, which Turkey joined, by the way. Turkey has troops still in Afghanistan, not combat troops, but troops that give services and build schools, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. After, though, in this new century, NATO has become a more debated issue in Turkey, and Islamic camp also started to raise growing concerns about Turkey's entry to NATO. So there are today Islamic circles who say, let's get out of NATO. And in AKP's constituency, there are people who think that NATO is wrong. We should get out of this. This was a Cold War reality, or so on and so forth. However, I don't think Turkey will ever get out of NATO. I don't think Turkey should get out of NATO. First of all, like our neighbors are Iraq, Syria, and Iran. This is a troubled area. For example, when we had issues with Syria, some Syrian missiles or bombs fell on our side. Turkey needed Patriot missiles. Where we got it from? NATO. It's a fact of life. This is a big military alliance, and it's a part of Turkish security. And you don't know what will happen with Iran or Syria or Iraq and who will be in power there. So it's a very dangerous neighborhood. And I think AKP doesn't plan to be out of NATO. However, it is an uneasy relationship at the same time. When Rasmussen was elected the head of NATO, for example, Turkey voiced a lot of concern because he was the Danish prime minister under who the cartoons of Prophet Muhammad was published. So Turkey brings some Muslim sensibility to NATO, maybe. But Turkey doesn't get out of NATO, and I think it won't. Well, to be a NATO, should you be a democracy? Yes, well, during the military coups, we didn't get out of NATO too. The fact that NATO doesn't impose your democratic credentials. European Union does. When you're in NATO, though, you're in the Western club. It's true. And the name of the game is democracy, so there is some connection between Turkey's willingness to enter NATO during the Cold War and Turkey's acceptance of a multi-party system by the Kemalists. Let's not forget that when Turkey established a single-party rule, the Kemalist single-party rule, it was the era of Hitler and Mussolini and the dictators. Democracy was not a big norm in the West either. After World War II, 1945, Turkey realized that fascist countries are defeated and there's democracy in the West. İsmet İnönü, the Atatürk successor, has a famous word. He says, "A new world is being built, and we'll take our place in it." So that's why Turkey allowed multi-party system and had a transition to democracy of sorts, and then joined NATO as well. So it is, yes, somehow connected, but not like European Union. I mean, European Union really gives you very concrete guidelines on freedom of the press, the jails, and the judiciary process, and so on and so forth. And those European Union criteria has been very helpful for Turkey to consolidate its democracy and improve its legal status. The problem is right now Erdogan is backing off from some of the European Union norms because he sees threats everywhere. Therefore, I think Turkey will continue to be a member of the NATO because our whole military structure is based on that. But it will still be an uneasy relationship because a part of the society thinks that it's not a popular demand, but whenever you sit in government, you see that it's a necessity to keep your relations with the NATO countries.
Do we have any? Yeah.
I mean, Turkey is obviously very aggressive on its foreign policies, and I mean, to the extent that some label it as a neo-Ottoman expansion, and we can see they are opening new embassies and diplomatic mission abroad. And it is not an exaggeration, I believe, that Mr. Erdogan is much revered as a voice of Islamic countries. And this sort of machismo, does it buy voters in Turkey? I mean, of course, many Islamists and young Muslim all over the world, I mean, look highly to what he had done for the Syrian people, how they, launched Rabi'a movement in support of Egyptians, and also by sending his wife and Mr. Davutoglu to Rohingya, just for, this humanitarian purpose. Whereas it does click some support for him internationally. How does it being viewed domestically by Turkish? Because we can see, there were rally and huge support for AKP and for what he done, as far as international Muslim affairs is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. You're a good observer of Turkish foreign policy and domestic politics, I must say. One thing, Turkey doesn't frame all of its foreign expansion or influence as neo-Ottoman. I mean, Turkey has opened a lot of embassies in Africa as well, places that Ottomans never went to. So much of it's also economic pragmatism. Turkey has opened up maybe more than 20 new embassies in Africa in the past 10 years because a lot of Turkish businessmen invest in those countries, and you need a Turkish embassy to further. So it is not merely ideological. It is pragmatic plus some ideological or romantic element to that. And I actually sympathize with that willingness to engage more with the Muslim countries of the world. I think we have an example to share with, a story to share with, also learn from, and I'm in favor of more interaction between Muslim countries. I don't believe in an Islamic union which will exclude other countries, and I think we should be in the European Union, but of course we should have better relations with Malaysia and so on and so forth. So I believe in more integration in that sense, at least like better dialogue and connections. Erdogan, of course, now frames himself as the hero of the Muslim world. The Middle East and even beyond. And yes, he has stood for Muslim causes in Palestine and so on and so forth. But also that heroism did not become as successful as was hoped in Syria. Yeah, we stood by the opposition, we did the right thing, but the regime is still there. So we probably exaggerated our influence. Erdogan probably exaggerated in his mind his influence. And I think now we are seeing the limits of Turkish influence when it comes to Middle East, especially Syria, for example. How this is perceived in Turkey? Well, everything is perceived in Turkey with a big division and polarization. So people ask me what do Turks think about this. I said there's nothing called Turks. There are pro-Erdogan Turks, anti-Erdogan Turks, and so in Erdogan's own base, of course, this is seen with a big this is a big reason to support Erdogan. He's the hero of Muslims. He's the hope of Muslims in Arakan and Palestine and so on and so forth. There's that rhetoric. So we should support him, Erdogan, not even for Turkey, but for all the Muslims. That's a powerful narrative that resonates. In the eyes of the opposition, this is just romanticism and propaganda, and it's surreal. It's not factual. And look what happened in Syria. I mean, you support the opposition. So in Syria, in Turkey, some people take pride that we supported the right cause. Others criticize Erdogan heavily for putting Turkey into a big risk adventure, even harming Syria by supporting the opposition, which includes now Al-Qaeda kind of groups. So it's a very divisive issue. I think a lot of people sympathize with the fact that we open up our borders to the refugees. But even that is now controversial. There are 700,000 Syrians inside Turkey now. Again, I think we should have opened our borders. Those people wouldn't be left to the slaughter of the Syrian regime. Sometimes some of the elements of the opposition as well. But I mean, people are saying, who are these people like on our streets, you know, and will they become Turkish citizens? There are conspiracy theories that Erdogan will make them citizens so he will increase his voting base, which is not true, I don't think. But I mean, every issue is very divided. And you can, if you read Turkish newspapers comparatively, it's fascinating. And there is no balanced newspaper, almost. But when you read all of them, it will be a very balanced picture, together. And you can, in all of these issues. You're welcome.
Thank you. Sister?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much, Brother Mustafa, for sharing a very much needed information. And I like the fact that you brought history to us as well, because I think history, especially Islamic history, is very important for us to get that neutral bearing and not to be absorbed so much in the condition that we live in. I especially would like to thank you for mentioning when in the era of the Ottoman period, when the Wahhabis in Arabia actually announced them as infidels because they gave more a right, or to say it's okay for girls to actually study. Something no-brainer today. Nobody would say that, we have to discuss whether girls are allowed to study or not. And that is something that we actually celebrate in Malaysia when it comes to the role of girls and also women in building nation, in building Malaysia to where we are today. No-brainer at all. Nobody questioned that. In fact, 63% of students in higher education in Malaysia are actually girls. Yeah, maybe even in University of Malaya here, where we are today. Unfortunately, that advancement of women's rights or women's participation in building the nation, when it comes to education, when it comes to economy participation, when it comes to even political participation, no question. Yeah, nobody said that we have to think about this women rights. But when it comes to personal law, women have always been subjected to, let's say, domestic violence and all other issues that we have across the board, not just for Muslim women. The difference is that in Muslim countries like Malaysia, Muslim women are also subjected to a different, or may I say limited, kind of freedom in our Islamic law. Why do I say that? It's because, like I said, the participation and everything, traditional roles today for women, even Muslim women, have shifted so much that it's, no married couple, especially Muslim, even Muslim married couple, would think that, should you be allowed to work or not, you wife, because it's much needed, this double income is much needed in family. So the traditional roles of women have changed dramatically as compared to in 7th century Arabia, or probably even during the Ottoman period, But the traditional rights have not changed. Yeah? And the traditional rights have been endorsed by law in our country. Yeah, where a woman's participation in the, let's say, in the income of the family is very much needed, but her role towards the betterment of relationship, let's say, with her husband, is not looked into. So, for example, when there is a quarrel, and because we have a Talinisa service, so we get a lot of questions asking about, what are my rights under the Islamic family law in Malaysia. So one of the questions is that I and my husband fought in the night, and out of, anger, he said, if you step outside the house, there will be talaq. Yeah, you will be given talaq automatically. And the next morning, he sent me to work. So I step outside the house. So is there talaq or not? This kind of, imbalance roles, traditional rights that are still maintained in the patriarchal interpretation of fiqh or Islamic jurisprudence. So, so much so that, during the Wahhabi or Ottoman period, when the Wahhabis said that you are infidel because you call for the banning of slavery, which is absent in the Quran. Yeah, and today, if I say to you, I want to take a slave, you would say, no, this is un-Islamic, right? But it's absent in the Quran. But sisters were calling for justice and equality, which is very much embedded in the spirit of Quran, is looked into as liberal. And now you talk about liberal being, those who are passionate in protecting the rights of those who want to wear hijab. But here, sisters in Islam is called as liberal Muslims, and therefore they are dangerous and enemy to the real Islam. So these are the challenges that we face, yeah, when we are only looking at, we do research work, and we found that the Ottoman women, their rights, they enjoy rights more than we in this 21st century in Malaysia have in our law. Yeah? So what are your thoughts, Brother Mustafa? Where can we bridge the understanding that calling for equality and justice in Muslim family is not against Islam? It is something that Allah has allowed in Quran when He talked about men and women being awliya to each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm so glad that I met you. Thanks to this opportunity. I've been following Sisters in Islam with admiration for many years, and I'm glad that we have a chance to come together now. Well, I should take permission from my wife to speak on these issues, actually. She knows these issues better and more, well-versed on this topic than me. And Riyadh, if you want to say something on this, would like to say something now? Or on,
Assalamu alaikum. I'm so glad that we finally met, considering we spoke over email. And I'm an avid follower of your work as well. This could be a conference of its own, I think, so we should be careful about how we're going to frame in terms of time. And one of the things, I agree absolutely with everything you said. We just have to also think about it. I also, in a wider context, if we think about, there is the problem of Muslim women internally, and I am always careful when I talk about Muslim women, because I believe that they're among the community of 1.6 billion Muslims. The issues that Muslim women face in different countries are very different. So the issues that Muslim women in America are facing are much different from what we deal with in Bosnia, Turkey, Malaysia. So we have to always take into context the individual stories of women. We can't generalize. And there is a big stigma that as a community we face as Muslim women, right, in terms of stereotypes in the Western media. And then there is, I have to say, the internal judgment inside the community among, Muslims. Whether you wear hijab, are you good enough of a Muslim or not? Whether, if you don't wear the hijab, does that mean that you can't be a good Muslim? And that's something that I personally leave to God, and the personal, in terms of this, what Mustafa was saying, state not being able to affect that. But I should also point out that in terms of my studying, I see increasingly, and you're probably aware about the fight for gender equality, so to speak, in the Western world as well. If you think about America, United States of America are 42nd in terms of gender equality. Here, because I always have it with me, recently in January, there was an article published about Germany becoming more traditional in terms of the roles of men and women. I mean, they have always been traditional, but becoming more conservative. So this is a story, a specific of its own when we talk about Islam, or personally, I don't think that we have to question the equality in Islam, starting from the Quran. But it's important to notice, for example, what you were also saying about the education of women. I was fascinated to read that there is a Catholic organization called Fix the Family, and I have it with me, and I read it to Mustafa as well. You know, they cite the similar reasons that some of the Muslim fundamentalists cite as well in terms of why girls should not be educated. You know, one of the reasons they say it is the cost of a degree is becoming difficult to recoup. You don't have to prove anything to the world. It could interfere with the religious vocation, etc. So the kind of things that the fundamentalists in every religion might use to disempower a particular group, if we talk about women here, by otherizing them, is problematic. So in that sense, I want to believe that there are many good Muslim men out there who are very aware of what our religion prescribes in terms of equality, just like people who are members of other religions have to fight it. Unfortunately, it is sad to see that in many Muslim countries, women are dealing with a lot of hardships, and that is a fact. With the new law in Afghanistan, I'm so scared, you know, I'm very sad. In 9 days, if President Karzai doesn't veto the law, very bad law about the domestic violence will be passed, where family members will not be able to testify against the domestic violence. And I mean, that is really bad for women. What goes on in other countries, I read in Saudi Arabia yesterday, you know, a woman was scolded for going alone to the doctor without a male guardian. That women cannot go to the doctor if they don't have a male guardian. And to me, personally, I reserve that right of individual opinion and conscience. That is not what Islam is about. And how we can go about it? Well, we can do what you're doing. We can write, we can talk, we can be educated, because I believe that by knowing the sources from Islam, by knowing about the life of, you know, Prophet's wife, about the life of Prophet, about sharing that information, we can keep on raising the awareness, because I don't want to let go of Islam as the source of justice and as a source of beauty, which is what I keep saying in the West, what Islam is for me. So I don't think we have to abandon the Islam as some of the people propagate by saying we have to be liberating and liberated woman by releasing Islam. No, we just have to keep educating ourselves and the community on the real sources from the Islam. So, and as we see in Germany, in Great Britain, in America, they're fighting for their own things, right? So I think that reinterpretation from within is what needs to happen, you know. And I think Muslim men need to speak up as well. We as Muslim women as well, but Muslim men need to stand next to us. So I'm very glad that my husband agrees with me, right?
How could it be
Right?
different? Exactly. Thank you, Riyadh.
Thank you so much.
And interestingly, religion, since it's a powerful reality, has been used and abused to justify authoritarian systems from the very beginning. I'm with you in the sense that Islam is a liberating religion, bringing equality, dignity to all human beings. But there have always been understandings of Islam who said, since you're Muslim, you should obey the slavery system, using your allegiance to Islam to justify something that is unjust, which favors that person. When you look at the abolition of slavery debates in the Christian world, you can see that there were Christians who said, God created humans unequal. Of course blacks are unequal. That's how God created them. Are you going against God's order? That was a Christian argument. Others said, no, God created everybody equal. That's why we should abolish slavery. And I think that was a more righteous interpretation of Christian values in that sense, which are not different from Islamic values in the sense, in the idea of creation. Of course, the authoritarian Muslims will always say, if you're liberal, if you have liberal ideas, you're a heretic, right? You're leaving a part of Islam. I think the part of Islam they're clinging to is not Islamic at all. It's Islam plus something else, and I'm not getting that something else, which is patriarchy, which is authoritarianism, which is a lot of cultural baggage on Islam. Therefore, we should not be misled by that like dichotomy. And the term liberal has become like somebody who doesn't believe in Islam in full, but abandons. It doesn't mean that way. It means just somebody who rejects the authoritarianism which was put on Islam after its initial century and centuries. So I very sympathize with what you're saying. In my book, I tried to cite also other evidence for women's issues and how to liberate women in the Islamic world. There are some other examples of Ottoman reform. And when we go back to the very early, actually, phase of our religion, we see many examples. I mean, I'm sure you know these, but you see how in the tafsirs, the situation of women gradually declined after the first few centuries. And while there was a much egalitarian view of women, after the first few centuries, with some medieval understandings, misogynistic statements entered into understandings of the Quran. Now, we are not moving away from Islam when we question those. We're actually going quite to the core of Islam. And I know that sisters in Islam have been working on this, and please keep on doing what you do, and we need those voices everywhere. And never be disheartened by the people that you're not following the real Islam. I think their understanding of Islam is the one which is problematic. And what should we do? Well, just spread the idea. We don't maybe have the oil resources or other things maybe other people have, but spread the idea and it will ultimately have an impact as it does. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mustafa. Before we end the session, I think I'll just take one last question.
Okay, I have two questions. It's referring to the statement.
Can you make it one, please?
Okay. I just ask one question about the. I think the last Congress of AKP, Erdogan did mention about the visions of Menziket. Besides the celebrations of 2023, the anniversary of 100th anniversary of the Turkish, the existence of the Turkish republics. He did mention about the vision of Menziket 2071. What does it mean and the long-term implication about this statement?
Okay. Well, that's a lot of propaganda and romanticism, I think, there. Menziket was the battle between Muslim Turks and the Byzantine Romans in the year 1071, like 1071. It's the time Turks won the battle. It was in eastern Anatolia, and winning that battle opened Anatolia, today's Turkey, to Turks. They moved into Turkey and they Islamized Anatolia gradually, and ultimately Byzantine Empire fell in 1453 to Fatih Sultan Mehmet, and so on and so forth. So Menskirt is this holy date in Islamic Ottoman Turkish history. So Erdogan was saying, now we are heading to the 1000th anniversary of Menskir. Well, towards the end of the 21st century, 2071, and he was hoping that his party would rule Turkey probably until then and prepare Turkey for that global. I think that's too far-fetched, and I think when parties start to get such a big narrative, some troubles might be also being made. If you say, we are such an important political player that our battle is something that will resonate for centuries, and the battle we're fighting is so holy that it's a big turning point in history, blah, blah, then you start to dismiss every criticism as nonsense because you are so sacred and you're so central to history. So this idea of centrality to history is a little risky idea. So Erdogan's general line is that Turkey is getting ready for the 100th anniversary of the Republic. That's more tangible, 2023. And his dream is to rule Turkey until 2024, at least. Because apparently he wants to be the president of Turkey in 2014, this summer. And the president can be elected for 2 terms, 5 plus 5, when you add 10 years to 2014, 2024. I think that's too long of a time, especially in a country where the more a leader stays in power, the more nepotistic and self-confident he becomes. I think Erdogan has done great things for Turkey. Without him, we would not be able to probably break the old tutelage and make a lot of reforms. But nobody's perfect. And now there are people around Erdogan who idealize him, the greatest thing that has ever happened to Turkey. I hear some of the rhetoric that was made about Ataturk now to Erdogan. The greatest leader we have ever seen in history, in centuries, and so on and so forth. And no criticism. That's an unhealthy thing. Even the best leaders, they're not prophets. Even prophets made mistakes and God warns them in the Quran. Of course, they're beyond human criticism, but they're not prophets, they're not wonderful beings. So I myself say that when I look at Erdogan, I see 10 great things that he did. Then I see 5 big mistakes. And as a friend, I'm saying, well, you did these things, but you're making these mistakes. I think that should be the way we should approach the politician's statement. And that's healthier for them. But unfortunately, sometimes they're surrounded by people who say, you are so amazing, and everybody who criticizes you, they don't understand you, and so on. And that's a big trap. Unfortunately, there's that trap being built in Turkey for a while. And I must say, I see Abdullah Gül, the president of Turkey, more nuanced on these issues. And I'm glad that he's at least out there as an alternative voice. Although he doesn't conflict with Erdogan because they have similar worldviews and values. But he has a different character, personality, and is more engaged in dialogue. And I think that's the way Turkey needs to go, that line of thinking. Yeah, but thank you for reminding that interesting, incident.
Thank you so much. I think it was a very fruitful discussion. And I would like to thank you, and I hope you had a pleasant stay. You have had a pleasant stay in KL, and you're going to enjoy your holidays in Penang.
Thanks to you all. Assalamu alaikum, and have a good Monday.